Continuing chapter 1 of part 6. Here, Nicodemus, a member of the Sanhedrin, the person who had an interview with Jesus by night, interposed with this question: does our law condemn a man except it hear first and know what he does? It seemed to be a plain and honest question, but so excited were this assembly of judges that they began to deal in invective, saying, "Art thou also of Galilee? Search and look, for out of Galilee arises no prophet." See, they're indicating that they don't know of any reference of such a Galilean prophet. But let us remember that Nicodemus of the church writings, or pre-Catholic church writings, you could say, of the 2nd century, wasn't this Nicodemus. Because there's a lot of confusion. You know, somebody in the 2nd century has a name Mark, and they say, "Oh, it's the Mark that knew Jesus." It's like, no. And they knew there was a church father that was a writer, but they kind of course, you know, this was a little bit before the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was about 180 of the Common Era. They were ready to quote Moses for their purposes, but would not listen when it made against them and their practices. And it was not true that no prophet had came from Galilee, as Jonah and Amos, and perhaps others, were of that country. So the assembly was broken up in disorder, and every man went to his house, while Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, and there spent the night. Again he came back to the city. The Feast of Tabernacles had ended. The lights were dead in the great candelabra that had shone upon the city, a reminiscence of the pillar of fire which had led their fathers through the wilderness. It was the painful darkness following a great light, the silence of a deserted banquet hall which now lay upon Jerusalem. Jesus entered the temple to teach the people. Every day a teacher could find hearers there. Now he might still find many who had come up from the provinces and were still lingering in the city. As soon as he was seated and prepared to teach, a very great concourse gathered about him. In the meantime, the scribes and the Pharisees had concocted a plan to entrap him and to raise against him the dislike of the people. They brought to him a woman taken in adultery, and set her in the midst of the crowd, and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was taken in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say?" The reference was to Deuteronomy 22:21. The woman must have been unmarried, but betrothed, as stoning was prescribed by the law only for such persons. She was therefore probably young and not hardened. This must have been a most painful ordeal. In nothing does a superior beauty of spiritual goodness over hard and technical morality appear more than in this scene. Well, spiritual goodness includes technical morality. It just gets beyond just, okay, here's a bunch of rules. Are we following them to the letter? Jesus was spotlessly pure. He did not assert his purity by bursting into invectives against the horrid creature. He modestly bent his head and wrote on the ground with his finger. He had no prurient curiosity. The subject was distasteful, but the scribes and Pharisees seemed carried away with their zeal for purity. They had dragged the poor guilty thing before the public gaze, and they were then committing a sin greater than hers. A malicious hypocrisy is worse than incontinence. Well, if someone needs punished for a crime, they need punished for a crime, but and that's certainly better than dragging them into a prison where it's up to the guards and the fellow prisoners what happens to them, and they become more of a criminal when they release as a rule, or they become basically ward of the state because they're they've become disabled because of neglect or abuse in such a situation. But every man engaged in this exposure had himself committed adultery. Because that was the problem. Not that they accused someone who committed such. Jesus did not wish to touch the question, but they urged it. They thought it would embarrass him. If he should say, "Stone her," he would be advising a breach of Roman law, which took such power out of Jewish hands. If he considered the case mildly, the populace would be excited against him as one who was disposed to relax the law of Moses. Because he said that he came to restore it, not to do away with any of it. So it's... These bad men were animated by many forms of vile passions. So they urged the question. Jesus, blushing, lifted himself up. He looked through each man's eyes to the bottom of his soul. He said, "Let him among you who has never sinned first cast a stone at her." See Deuteronomy 17, verse 7. Again he blushed and stooped and wrote. The word smote them. It aroused their consciences. The oldest Pharisee among them was an adulterer. So was the youngest scribe. So was each man. Some of the crowd probably knew the licentiousness of the hypocrites, and, if so, gave them such significant looks as must have been most embarrassing. The oldest Pharisee among them sneaked off. So did the youngest scribe. So did each man. When Jesus again rose from his stooping posture, they had all departed. The woman had not moved. He said, "Where are those your accusers? Has no man condemned you?" She answered, "No, sir, neither do I," said Jesus. "Go and sin no more." Now, some people authentically deal with what they have done wrong by trying to address it in society. But, there may not have been that many who accused, just a handful of people, or a few people or something, and, she had sinned. He had no license to give to sin, whether the popular opinion or even his indulgence should withhold condemnation. Her only safety was in abstaining from sin. Nothing could have won her from the downward course on which she had entered so much as this exquisite tenderness of Jesus. Perhaps, pointing to the huge lamps now kindled, he exclaimed, "I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness, but has the light of life." On the spot, his adversaries endeavored to counteract the force of his teaching by saying to him, "You bear testimony concerning yourself. Your testimony is not true," as if they would quote him against himself, and urge that self-glorification was his aim. Jesus answered, "Even if I bear testimony concerning myself, my testimony is true, for I know whence I came, and whither I go. But ye know not whence I come, and whither I go. Ye judge according to the flesh. I judge not any man. And even if I do judge, my judgment is true. For I am not alone, but I and he who sent me." See, it's not whether the crowd agrees with you. It's whether the fundamentals of what God has revealed are on your side. But it is also written in your own law that the testimony of two is true. I am a witness concerning myself, and my Father who sent me witnesses for me. Here is a claim to a mysterious origin and a high position in the universe. The nature of the case was such that he was compelled to bear witness concerning himself. Nay, more, his very nature was such that he was compelled to testify of himself as light, which shows the existence of other things, makes its own existence known. Moreover, they were so fleshly that they could not of themselves discern spiritual things, so that he was obliged to show them. They took a sinful pleasure in discerning in man what they might condemn. He took no such pleasure. He was not ready to judge and condemn men. If they had been as free from this evil disposition as he, they would not seize every word he spoke as matter for condemnation. But when he spoke of his Father as being a witness for him, his enemies asked, "Where is your Father?" His reply was, Ye neither know me nor my Father. If ye had known me, ye would have known my Father also. They must have understood him to mean that he felt a consciousness of being one with God. That certainly was the claim which Jesus set forth. Whether he was mistaken or not, whether he told the truth or a falsehood, these are two other questions. But whether he made this claim is a question readily answered. He most manifestly did, and no one could find such a claim made by any man, otherwise very good and exemplary, without feeling that, however mistaken he might be, he is unquestionably sincere in his belief. The whole question of the divinity of Jesus is narrowed to the inquiring whether his judgment was hurt by a false consciousness. If that question be determined in the affirmative, then we have these difficulties on our hands, namely to account for a man so immaculate, so surpassingly good, so profound, so rapid and searching a reader of the human heart, that the like of him has never arisen among the sons of men, a being with such self-control, such vast powers of mind, and wonderful endowments of physique, living the most resplendent of human lives, and dying a sublimest death, a martyrdom, and influencing the ages by his life and death, while he himself was inwardly crazed by believing himself to be one person, while he was in reality another, living and dying in the belief that he was God, while in the point of fact he was really inferior to even any man who knows he is. But again, he doesn't claim to be God, or literally a son of God. He knew better. He knew who his physical parents were. It was truth or blasphemy which he was speaking, or maybe just believing something that wasn't true, because blasphemy is not the same thing as having a different belief or expressing a different belief. From the standing point of the Jews, they must have deemed it the latter, yet they have not had the courage to lay hands on the man who had committed in their hearing the greatest crime possible under the theocracy. Well, it was no theocracy. They were ruled by Romans, but and aside from that, they were ruled by the Sanhedrin, which was not the same thing as being ruled by God's law. Because the conservative law is not the same thing. His good greatness seemed to paralyze them. Then said Jesus again to them, I go away, and you shall seek me, and in your sins you shall die. For where I go, you have not the ability to come. The Jews said, will he kill himself? He replied, you are of those beneath. I am of those above. You are of those beneath. I am of those above. You are of the world. I am not of the world. I said to you that you shall die in your sins, for if you do not believe that I am, you shall die in your sins. They asked him sarcastically, who are you? He replied, what say I to you from the first? I have many things to say and to judge concerning you, but the Father who sent me is here, and I speak to the world those things which I heard from him. John inserts the explanatory sentence, they understood not that he spoke to them of the Father God. So utterly obtuse and fleshly were they that even these mystical utterances of Jesus were incomprehensible. Then he said to them, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then shall you know that I am, and for myself I do nothing, but as the Father has taught me, so I speak. And he who sent me has not left me alone. He is with me, for I do always those things that please him. Upon this, many of the people believed on him. There was something in the words or in the manner of both which touched them and woke them into faith, but it was not very great or very intelligent faith, as appears from what immediately follows. He said to such, if ye continue in my word, then are ye my disciples indeed, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall emancipate you. He saw that they were regarding him in a sensuous light, as a political deliverer from the Roman yoke, and therefore spoke this word to set them right. He had exhibited such courage in peril, and spoke so frankly of his consciousness being one with God, that they had begun to think that they might have been misled by his antecedents, and in his manner and that this, after all, was the Christ, the anointed, the Messias, still connecting him, however, with their hopes of freedom from the Roman yoke. His speech, which claimed that all his triumphs were to be spiritual, opened their eyes to their misapprehension. Moreover, it touched them on the sorest spot of their hearts, as the reply shows. They indignantly answered him, Seed of Abraham are we, and to no man have we been slaves at any time. How do you say then, ye shall be emancipated? So blind were they as to forget that their fathers had been slaves in Egypt and Babylon for generations, and that they were virtually at that very moment the slaves of the Roman Empire. Jesus replied, I most solemnly assure you that whoever is doing sin is the slave of sin, and the slave abides not in the house continually. If therefore the Son shall emancipate you, you shall be indeed freed. So if you're liberated by the knowing of the knower of God, then you're, I know that you are Abraham's seed, but you seek to kill me, because my word has no place in you. I speak what I have seen with my Father, God being a different being than Jesus. And you then do what you have seen with your father. These last words seemed addressed to the crowd promiscuously. It excited their anger greatly. If they had believed on him before they dropped him now, and with vehemence replied, Abraham is our father, Jesus said unto them, If you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham, but now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I have heard from God. This did not Abraham. You do the works of your father. This still more incensed them. See, and they're talking about, see, it's again the metaphor. It's like, well, you're not the children of Abraham. Well, probably they weren't in another sense, but they kind of believed that as a rule. And they retorted, they believed they were Abrahamic descendants. And they retorted, we are not born of fornication. One father have we, God. See, again, they understood the metaphor. If God were your father, replied Jesus, you would have held me dear, for I proceeded forth and have come from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech? Because you cannot hear my discourse. It is important to notice the distinction between lalia and logos, the former signifying the outward articulate utterance of the latter, which means a reasonable, connected line of thought. You were of your father, diabolos, the calumniator, accuser, somebody who casts things at things, and the desires of your father you are minded to do. He was a manslayer from the beginning, and in the truth he is not an abiding place, for the truth is not in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar and the liar's father. But because I speak the truth, you do not believe me. Who of you convicts me of wrong? The word means error as well as fault, mistake of judgment as well as sinfulness of life. The word which I have translated convicts signifies to prove the fallacy in one's logic as well as to fasten upon one the charge of wrongdoing. Why do you not believe me if I speak the truth? He who is of God hears the words of God. On this account you hear not, because you are not from God. Upon their claiming to be Abraham's children, Jesus showed them that they had none of the characteristics of the spiritual descendants of Abraham. That was tantamount to a charge of spiritual bastardry, which they repelled by claiming God as their father. But Jesus shows them that they have not the characteristics of spiritual children of God, because they hate the one that has come out of God, out from God. Well, that's a weird way to phrase it, unless you take the whole Jesus is a son literal thing. But we know he had an earthly mother. The Bible admits that, and that people are like, well, Joseph's your father, isn't he? If they were God's spiritual children, the truth would be their vernacular, but they cannot receive the truth. It is as unintelligible to them as an unknown language. He then pours the awful statement into their ears that they are the children of the devil, who was at once a liar and a murderer, who in the beginning sought to destroy the race and endeavored to accomplish his nefarious designs by a lie. Well, influenced certain things, but the devil never physically harmed anyone. The Jews showed this disposition towards Jesus, the lying, homicidal spirit, in that they sought to kill him, not for any error of thought or wrong of life, for he appeals to them if they have ever been convinced on evidence that he had done wrong or made a mistake. Well, whether he did or not, if you just don't agree with somebody's words, if they're not slandering people and trying to put people to harm by their words, in some other way that's worthy of punishment, that's whatever. But and maybe some of that stuff in that category could be worse, But that's up to God to deal with. Or it was a great claim. He challenges any flaw to be shown in his doctrines or life, and yet they hate him murderously. If they were of God, they would hear the words of God, but their failure to hear the words of God, which Jesus professed to speak, is proof they are not of God. Then they are the devil. Well, perhaps in this case, but one of the things is it's not you're of God or you're of the devil. Most people are a mix. Jesus rested his reproof on actual facts of which they were cognizant, such as their known desire to slay him. To his lofty rebuke they reply with coarse invective. Is it not polite in us to say that thou art a Samaritan and hast a demon? They were going to throw at him the two hardest words known in Jewish quarreling, just because they knew no harder, but they sought to intensify them by saying, it is really a stretch of politeness to call yourself a Samaritan. Are we not doing a handsome thing to restrain ourselves and go no further than to say, you have a demon? Jesus calmly replied, I have not a demon. I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. And I seek not my glory. There is one who seeks it and judges. The mention of God's judgment arouses his compassions. And he says to them, I solemnly assure you that if anyone shall keep my word, he shall not see death through the ages. The Jews replied, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham is dead, and the prophets. And you say, if a man keep my word, he shall not taste of death through the ages. See, that's the thing. One's death is only one physical death. It's not that you're continually dying through the aeons, right? Are you greater than our father, Abraham, who is dead, and the prophets who are dead? Whom do you make yourself? This was pressing him to declare his exact position toward God and toward Abraham, to reveal himself wholly in all his claims. He simply answered that if he glorified himself, his glory would be nothing, that his Father would bring all his glory to light, and that Father was the God whom they professed to adore. He thus claimed to be the Son of God in an exclusive sense. Well, the people when there's a Nabi, that Nabi is the living word. Not that there's not lesser living words later to come, but they are, they are the first of the believers among their people. And then it spreads out from them because, religion has degraded and been defiled in different ways, you could say. It's not religion itself, but you know what I mean, the idea of religion. He adds, and you have not known him, although you call him your God, and I know him, and if I should say I know him not, I should be a liar to you. I should be a liar like to you, but I know him and I keep his word. He presents this as if he felt that they were urging him to deny his own consciousness, to declare that he was not what he felt himself to be, one with God. See, somebody who's surrendered unto God and not disagreeable to God. To assume a lower position would be to violate his own nature, to falsify his convictions, and deny the truth of God. Now, people's nature is right. It's just some people know and practice their nature instead of trying to do something else. In regard to Abraham, however, he said, Abraham, your father, as you claim, exulted that he saw my day, and he saw it and was glad. This was an astonishing assertion, they said with sarcasm. You have not 50 years yet, and has Abraham seen you? Jesus replied most loftily, as if from some far-off eternity, I most solemnly declare to you that before Abraham was born, I am. Well, that's a realization for all of us, is that our existence is before the incarnation of any particular prophet. And we find this in the Quran and some other places about the primordial existence of human beings. If this be not the senseless assertion which the Jews took it to be, is a declaration of the consciousness which Jesus felt of his being and existence before time began. Well, that's not entirely the point either. Before measurements of duration have been discovered in eternity, eternally coexisting with the being whom he calls his Father, and whom we all suppose to be God. The Jews took up stones to cast at him, but he somehow hid himself from the frantic multitude and went out of the temple. And isn't the Islamic reference to that event something about, something about like 8 angels saved him because he knew 8 names of he prayed using 8 names of God, and 8 angels came to save him. And well, I mean that was just the means that God chose, but something like that, right?